All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to the show today. Today's guest is Hilary Allen, and Hilary is a top skyrunner, also a scientist, a teacher, a speaker, and a coach. Hilary has a new book out titled Out and Back, and we're going to delve into that book. But first, Hilary, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, very nice. Hilary, before we dive into the book and your story, I understand, do you have a workbook out for that too, for the book?
So I have, I also have like an audio book, so you can listen to that as well. And on my website, if you can join, my nickname's Hilly Goat, you can join a Hilly Goat run book club. So if you sign up, you'll get this little fun PDF that you can read the book and then follow along on your runs. So
I enjoyed the book very much. I haven't had a chance to get into the follow-up material there, but
it's
yeah,
there if you want it.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah. So before we start, I want to tell everybody this is a book you should definitely read. We're going to have a picture up on it when we finish the podcast here. But it's a book you should definitely read. It reads very easily, but I want to encourage everyone who reads it, slow down a little bit and absorb some of the material, the lessons in there. May be familiar lessons to you, they may not, but whether they are or not, they're worth reflecting on. So it's a profound book. It's an enjoyable book, and go out and get it. So Hilary, a little bit about your background. I understand that you were always an active child, and you were at the same time as enjoying physical activity, you were also interested in science from a young age. So can you talk about your background a little bit?
Yeah, and thank you so much for the plug of the book. I think it's much more than, a recovery story or a story for athletes. So, but yeah, so my childhood, I actually grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado. So I grew up in a very active family. So the Rocky Mountains, like they were, at my doorstep. Outside of Fort Collins, and so both of my parents actually. So the reason we lived in Fort Collins, they're professors. So they were professors at Colorado State University, and so we had the summers kind of more free from their teaching schedules, and so we would take the family, my sister and I and my parents and the dog, and we'd go in a camper van and we would basically go visit the United States, like all the national parks. I've been to almost every state. And yeah, I like to say that I grew up outside. It's just, I had this curiosity for the outdoor world. I had this curiosity for how things worked. I had this curiosity for science, and that's kind of the string that's like taken me from my childhood all the way into my adult life. It's this idea of curiosity and, where it can kind of bring you, if you're willing to ask these questions of why and how, and yeah.
Yeah, the question asking part is really important.
Yeah.
Because that transfers over from strict science to just living. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
So you were originally interested in entomology, bugs.
Yeah.
And
I still am. I think I still describe myself as an aspiring entomologist.
yeah, yeah, but somehow along the line, you switched to an interest in neuroscience. How did that happen?
Yeah, so actually, interestingly enough, when I look back onto bugs, and I'm still curious about insects now and how they work, they're kind of the perfect example of neuroscience in action. Like pheromones and how bugs communicate and how they use chemical signals and like all of these like chemical excretions or whatever. They're very, very creative. Creative things. Like I love just learning more about them. But with science, I actually discovered a love for chemistry in high school, and that propelled me to go to just in college to major in chemistry, specifically organic chemistry. And I took kind of a little bit of a break, like a gap year between undergrad and graduate school. As a kid, I always knew that I had to go to college, but I always knew I was going to grad school. Like I knew college wasn't the end for me. It was very much the beginning. And so I was toying with the idea of going to graduate school for, organic chemistry, but I decided I needed a little bit more of a real life application instead of just spending time in lab synthesizing, new drugs or new molecules. I wanted more of a application. And the more I went to a liberal arts college and I ended up taking some psychology classes, and I was really interested in the human brain. And to me, it was just a beautiful application of organic chemistry and in like a biological system, and how actually chemicals work in your brain, and then if it's incorporated into this system, it creates the beautiful human condition. And so that's what led me into that. So I took a year off applying for grad school. I was working in a chemical company for a while, for a year, and then I applied to grad school, and I chose to go to University of Colorado in Denver. And I was in the PhD program for neuroscience and physiology.
All right. So that's really fascinating. My wife and I have been married for almost 50 years, and we spent 30 of them in Fort Collins.
Oh, that's such a small world. I love Fort Collins.
From 1970 to 1998, and then a couple times back there again.
Well, then our time definitely overlapped, and certainly they overlapped with my father and my mother. So
yeah. So you're still living in Fort Collins?
No, I'm in actually Boulder, Colorado, but
Boulder,
I frequent Fort Collins quite often. Yeah.
I have some friends in Boulder too. But now here we are in Oregon. But anyway, so your two loves as a child are still your two loves, the outdoors and science.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy to experience that. And like I said, I think curiosity is that piece. I think as kids, everyone has curiosity, but it can, as we get older, I think, certain obligations of life or just kind of the pace of life, it can kind of discourage that curiosity. And I've been lucky enough to have two passions that have actually encouraged that in me every day. So
yeah, the fast pace of life discourages a lot of times curiosity or creativity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can just about, you just work all week, and then you're tired one day, and then you eat and you do whatever you do, and
yeah, exactly.
no major curiosity comes out or creativity. It can, but you have to shift your priorities a little bit.
Exactly.
So when you say neuroscience, that could be studying the way the brains of insects work. That could be studying the chemical reactions in the brain, or that could be studying neuroplasticity. So could you comment on which specific things that you actually involve yourself in and which of them you're interested in?
Yeah, so actually when I first went into graduate school, I had this idea to study addiction because I thought it was maybe more of the straightforward pathway to apply, my biochem and my organic chem to studying problems in the brain, dysfunction of synaptic pathways, basically, like, too much of one chemical versus, too little of another. But as I got into the program, actually, my interest shifted and I became more interested in so I guess I'll just explain some of the projects I had. So bigger projects would be disease models. So Alzheimer's, and another one was schizophrenia. Basically, it was really cool. I would describe it as like engineering a drug that could work for a certain person, like their genetic makeup. So I took my organic chemistry knowledge and I was working on figuring out exactly how this molecule could bind in the environment of the brain. And so it was really cool. I got to use these big things called, these big magnets that were called NMR machines, like nuclear magnetic resonance, which is basically just a bigger application of an MRI machine. To like literally visualize the binding surface of a molecule, in the environment of of a neuron. And so that could apply to how your brain would be in a kind of a state of dysfunction in a disease model like schizophrenia or Alzheimer's. And so it was really cool to see how, you know, on the molecular level, things were kind of going wrong and how you could kind of fix them. And that could lead to like changes on, you know, a bigger level. Yeah.
So what kind of progress is being made there? My father had Parkinson's disease,
And so,
that was very
yeah,
tough.
it is. And that's exactly a degenerative neurological disease. And so there's a lot of new actually pathways and research being done. In fact, a neighboring lab of mine was working on Parkinson's disease, and they were looking at the mitochondria and basically how you could manipulate diet and basically the environment that a person lived in and how that could actually create healthier neurons. For instance, like a high fat diet, it could, because your brain is like, and your nervous system has, the neurons have a lot of fat in them. And so things from that, and then applying that into learning exactly how the mitochondria works and how, if you can optimize that function with a diet full of antioxidants, how that could, you know, improve symptoms or increase longevity of basically the neurons and prevent degradation. And then, of course, there's, you know, people looking at genetic markers and how, if you've heard the term epigenetics, how that could be manipulated to basically decrease expression of a particular gene that is basically associated with that disease model. So there's quite a few studies being done. Yeah.
So for our listeners, the term epigenetics, could you just give them like a brief, you're a teacher, so you'd be able to give them a brief sentence or two. What is that?
We'll see. Okay, so everyone has heard of, you know, the DNA. So DNA, your genetic makeup, it's consisted of, you know, 4 bases. We've heard these names before, like AG, TC, like these bases, and they match and they create this double helix, and that's what makes our DNA. It's like in our chromosomes. Well, it's a little bit more complicated. So you take that DNA that's twisted in its double helix model that we've seen, and you keep on twisting it around itself. Kind of like a string that you keep on twisting. And eventually, as you twist it, it's this nice double helix, and then it twists on itself and creates these little like balls on a string. So that's kind of a bigger structure of what condensed DNA looks like when it's actually in kind of the chromosomes. But there's other factors that help that folding. So you keep on twisting it and you can't twist it any further. Well, then there's little proteins that come and stack in on itself, and you end up with this bigger structure that looks like beads on a string. And the DNA is safely kind of packed in the middle. And on the outside, there's this protective coating, so to speak, of other proteins. And so those proteins, if you can like layer them back, it's kind of like layers in a cake. Like you think the softest, most fragile layers on the top, like the frosting. And then as you cut into it, you get to the meat, like the good parts of the cake. And so that's kind of how our DNA is structured. And when we talk about epigenetics, we're talking about of those layers in the cake, and the beads on a string, like the proteins that are safely packing the DNA into that like bigger 3-dimensional structure, which are the chromosomes.
So with all that, what is the good news about epigenetics?
Epigenetics, it's actually really cool, is that we're learning that the environment can actually change the expression of your genes. So previously we thought that, okay, well, if you have a certain gene, you're kind of doomed to get this disease. But we're learning that that's not the case, that if you actually live in a healthy environment, like with good diet, this kind of thing, like the environmental factors that you can control, that actually has a bigger factor for gene expression than we had ever thought before. And this also explains things like a typical model. When we talk about epigenetics, we think about alcoholism, like it's something that's kind of like skips generations. So, but that also, it kind of is, we're seeing that it's maybe environment, like nature versus nurture, this kind of argument. But basically saying is like maybe we as humans, if we take control over our lifestyles and our health, that we actually can lead better lives than before. And I mentioned diet, but also one of the biggest factors would be sleep. So that's a plug there.
Yeah. I tend to sleep a lot more than most people do.
You're healthy.
Yeah. I feel good.
Yeah.
So what we've done here is I think I probably wouldn't mind talking to you about science for an hour, but what we've done here is we've kind of gotten into the holistic side. You talked about drugs that can help, and then you talked about lifestyle changes that can help. And I have seen some studies on both related to Alzheimer's, but we won't go there right now, probably. But so that really kind of reflects your life also, because you're fascinated about all these things that are fascinating, but also you like to get out there and have adventure. And I'm sure that you have looked at your own diet a little bit and actually said a few things about that in the book. But so let's go on to the physical side of it for a moment, because it's great to be a whole person and to have all these interests that you put together into being a whole person. It's wonderful. So for our listeners who don't know, and I've encouraged them to watch a short video on the Tromsø or Tromsø race, little highlight. So for those of our listeners who don't know, can you tell them what sky running is? And by the way, it's a very beautiful thing.
Yeah. So that's what drew me to it. So again, this curiosity that I had from my scientific endeavors is when I got into running, I wanted to see kind of where it could take me. And the more I ran outside, I mean, like I said, I grew up in Colorado, so trails were just part of my life. And so once I started running on them, I started running up and to the top of these peaks. And I quickly got into, I got this nickname called the Hilly Goat. And so I had this knack.
Wait, let's stop there.
Yeah.
Tell us how you got that nickname. There's a little story that goes with that.
Yeah,
because you thought you were in over your head at one time.
Yeah. So on my first real trail run, like a real mountain run, I thought I was going with my friends and my boyfriend at the time. And we were going on these peaks in Boulder. And I was thought, okay, well, if I get too tired or that I can't keep up, it's fine. I'll just go my own pace. It's going to be fine. But then as we got going.
By the way, that theory is profound. Because you were willing to take the risk, but you knew how to handle it. But go ahead with your story. Yeah.
And so I kept just going, and it was fun, and I was enjoying myself. And I just as it got steeper, I kind of got into this power hike, and I just kept going. And, before I knew it, we were at the top, and I looked behind me and everyone was behind me. And I'm like, oh wait, what happened? And then when they got to the top, they're like, oh man, you were born for this. So you're like a goat out here. I'm going to call you the Hilly Goat. And it just stuck ever since.
Yeah.
And so then after that, like when I started running, I was just drawn to the uphills and drawn to the steeper things. And so I discovered this type of running in the world of ultra running, which is, anything longer than a marathon is usually kind of on trails. And this ultra running, but particularly sky running. And sky running are just basically the steep terrain. So it cuts out the runnable parts and you just stick to the mountains. And it was coined actually in Europe because they have these coastal mountain ranges, which can start from the sea and go to the sky. But in the US, we have some races like that too, but it's usually just really steep terrain. So a typical sky race, like an ultra, would be about 31 miles, and it would gain about 12,000 to 13,000 feet. And then you have to descend that, of course. And so they're very steep. They're very technical. There's some ridges involved. There's some races in the US, like in Utah called Speed Goat. There's one in Montana called Big Sky, called Run the Rut. There's one, they're all over the United States, actually. in California, the Broken Arrow Sky Race. Yeah, so I started competing in those just because I just truly loved just the steep, technical mountain type running.
Yeah. So, and the knife edge ridges and
Yeah,
yeah.
keeps things interesting.
So it wasn't too long after you. Let me ask you one question here. It's when you got that nickname, and I can tell you like the nickname because it's very fitting to your skills and strengths, and it's very beautiful. Because what do we enjoy the most about being out there is that we can run free. We can, we're not confined to just sitting in one spot. We can really get out there.
Yeah.
You especially, and comparing yourself to an animal that's so gifted, that's wonderful. So what I want to ask you is, when they gave you that nickname, and it dawned on you that you were pretty good at this, how did that feel? Or did you, as we could, take that for granted at the time? That
Yeah.
revelation of a gift.
So I think I was just so thankful that I could, explore the world in a different way and explore the world kind of in a way that just felt so I felt so connected to the world, to the earth, to myself. And so that when it took me a little bit to realize that I had some talent for it. And it wasn't until I started racing that I realized, okay, like, I mean, this is fun. And of course it's fun to like win races or do well. But then when it gives you an opportunity to even explore more parts of the US, but then the world, when I started running and racing professionally for the North Face, I just felt so incredibly lucky and thankful that I was able to do that. And so I'm sure there's certain times when I would take that for granted, right? Like if I would stress out for a race, and performance goals, but I'd always come back to that. It's that this is an opportunity for me to play and to enjoy a new place and to see someplace new that I've never been before, just on the power of my own 2 feet.
Right. So you didn't particularly take that for granted. That's awesome. And when you got to the peak first, what did your face look like? Did you smile?
No, of course. I'm like notorious for, even during a race and I'm trying really hard, that I always can crack out a smile.
Yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't very long before sky running kind of took over and took away some of your priorities in terms of going to grad school. So what was that decision like?
Yeah, so I mean, in graduate school, it requires a lot of time. And as I started running, I discovered trail and ultra running in graduate school, but I basically, something had to give. Both require an immense amount of time. And graduate school, I was working anywhere from 60 to 70 hours a week and then running on top of that. And it just became, I mean, I loved them both and I didn't want to choose, but there became a point where I realized that I need that with my success with ultra running and the need to travel to now not only national races around the US, but to international races around the world. I was given this opportunity, which I literally couldn't say no to. And I really had to look within myself. And it was one of the hardest decisions I had to make because I was taking a chance. I was taking a chance on kind of like this defined path and lifestyle to pursue a PhD and get my PhD and do a postdoc and have, get a professorship and have a successful lab, to this life, which was full of adventure and uncertainty, and who knew if I could actually make it as a professional athlete. But I was drawn to it and I loved it and I wanted to take that chance. And so I decided to master out. And so to get my master's degree, and then take a chance on running. And I told myself that first I would give it a year and see if I could, have some good performances, maybe get, some sponsors and see if I could, do this. And now fast forward to 6 years later.
Yeah. So you got a sponsor within the first year, but
Yeah.
you said you would give it a year. And in 2017, you were ranked number one in the world in the sky running circuit.
Yeah.
And then you entered that fateful race in Norway, got to see Norway.
Mm-hmm.
3 hours into the race, you were leading the race. Everything was going perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And you took one step. And what happened?
Yeah. So, yeah, I was feeling, great and really enjoying it, doing one of my favorite things in the world, which is running in a new place that I've never explored before. And I remember I was on this ridge, and it's pretty technical terrain, so about third class, where you use a hand to kind of put down and stabilize yourself if it's because it's pretty technical and steep. And I remember rounding this corner and seeing some photographer friends of mine yelling at me in encouragement. And in one step, the next thing I realized is that I was airborne, and I was, falling, and the horizon was upside down, and the world slowed down at that point. I mean, I just matter of factly told myself that, I was gonna die, and that this was it, that I needed to brace myself for impact and stay calm, do what I could, but that this was it, that I was falling. And in one instant, my whole entire world was just shifted and changed. And in total, I had fallen about 150 feet off of that ridge line, and impacted the mountain several times before I reached a stop. And yeah, I was, found on the side of a racer. So it happened during a race. So this racer had seen it happen. Many people had seen it happen, and, they were able to initiate a rescue operation. But I mean, you mentioned the book, and this is where it starts.
Yeah.
This, we have defining moments in our life, and, where we can say distinctly, okay, I've been changed after this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And this was that moment, one of the moments for me.
Yes, it was. You've had more than one, and I believe we all have more than one.
I think so too.
Because there's an evolving life, and it takes more inflection points than one. But this was a very difficult and painful one you had. So you fell and impacted the mountain a number of times, and when you quit falling, you were really broken.
Mm-hmm.
Injury to the L4, L5 vertebrae, the biggest vertebrae that we have, and ribs, wrists. Your legs were not broken, but your feet were. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And you didn't have major internal injuries,
which
or a head injury.
Right.
So in all of that moment of terror, there were some blessings.
Exactly. And to this day, I think about it, and it gives me shivers, because I mean, if I impacted the mountain, 5 or 6 times, there's so many opportunities for me to break my neck, have a concussion, be paralyzed. And miraculously, that didn't happen. My injuries were substantial. I mean, in total, there were 14 bones that I had broken, some major ones, as you just listed. But there were many aspects that it could have been a lot worse. And people who were on the scene that day, when they scrambled down to me, they did not expect to see me alive.
And didn't think you were when they found you.
Mm-mm.
At first.
Yeah.
Living in Fort Collins, you might be familiar with Amy Van Dyken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you met her?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, she has that biggest smile always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she went through all her athletic training and just got hurt on an ATV.
Right.
But so can you comment on, I think you would have died had you been up there on that ridge by yourself on a training run.
Yeah.
So can you comment on your friend, was it Manu?
Manu, yeah. Manu Parr.
Yeah. How he held you together?
Yeah, literally. So it's funny. I mean, in the world of trail running, and just even in sports, I think you meet certain people and you can have these connections, even if you don't know them at all. And the case was with Manu. I mean, we were sharing some early miles early on in the race, and we were kind of going back and forth. He was faster than me on the downhill, and I would pass him on the uphill. So, and this was in the race. I had just met him that day. And when I reached the ridge and the halfway point, I was ahead of him. And so he was right behind me when he saw it happen. And miraculously and luckily, he's trained in mountain rescue. And so he just went into, it just go mode. And so he scrambled down to me, and, he thought he was doing basically a body recovery because he had never seen anyone survive that kind of a fall. And so when he got down to me, he was just moving me from the edge so I wouldn't continue to fall. And it wasn't until he was moving me that he actually felt a heartbeat and saw my chest rise as I was breathing. And then from there, he was trying to control the bleeding. There was a slash in my thigh that you could fit your hand in sideways, and he was holding that shut. I remember waking up and seeing his face really close to mine, and that was because his forehead, he didn't have enough arms. Like, he was using both of his arms to stabilize my legs.
He actually used his forehead to hold that.
Forehead to, I had a pretty big gash on my forehead, and so he was using his forehead to hold that shut. Yeah.
And Killian Jornet was there, and someone else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Killian was there. He's the race director, and Ian Corliss, the photographer, and my other friend, Martina Valmosoy, she's also a photographer. They all were able to come down there and help while we waited for the doctor to arrive in the helicopter.
So they actually put their own life at risk going down that.
Yeah.
Difficult to get down there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then, can you describe your first 5 days in the hospital?
Yeah, the first 5 days were a lot of a blur. I honestly don't think I realized what had happened until day 2. I think it was just a combination of the painkillers and just really not knowing what was going on. It wasn't until my mother arrived on that second day that I realized that the accident had actually happened to me. I was totally wrapped up. I had, IVs and cords coming, out of me, so many stitches, and I was just unable to move. I even had a catheter because I wasn't strong enough to get up and even go to the bathroom. And honestly, that was just kind of it. I would just lay in pain, waiting for the 4 hours until I could get, more painkillers. And then next, the 5th day, I think that was the substantial turning point, is, well, one of many, but a turning point where a nurse, she looked at me and she could see that I was just mentally just kind of wasting away. And she said that you have to fight. And she sat me up, and we, got me over to the chair next to my bed just to have breakfast. And then, from there, I would try to motivate to kind of get out and get in the wheelchair and kind of go up and down the halls with my mom. Yeah.
Yeah. So I find that wonderful what the nurse was able to do there. I think she told you, this is not it for you.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And, I've worked in inpatient settings like that, and it's wonderful when you can get the right person that says the right thing at the right time.
Mm-hmm. I know. And I still remember her to this day, just her face and her kindness, and just, I think she could read my feelings even without me saying anything.
Yeah, I think everybody has a gift, or more, maybe many more.
Yeah.
And some people are really cut out for that kind of care. I certainly have known a number of them myself. Mm-hmm. So you didn't give up, but you were so traumatized after the accident that I'm sure you were at that point of kind of giving up. Mm. You were on that teeter-totter there that we all get on.
Yeah.
And that's such a recurring but significant part of life, I think.
Exactly. I mean, I think And that persisted for me for months and even, years. And it's still something that I have to deal with is, like life is never perfect and there's always the unexpected. Certainly my accident was incredibly unexpected for me, but, life is all about taking those challenges and finding a new balance, finding, a way to not get knocked off the teeter-totter or like, basically stuck at the bottom or, even at the top, right? To come back down
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was an opportunity just for me to, I think, just discover kind of the beauty of life again, at a different pace. And
Yeah.
even though it was incredibly difficult to find that balance, even on a daily basis, that pursuit was worthwhile because I learned so much about myself throughout the process.
I think that you might agree with this, that the universe will give us an injury sometimes when we have to slow down.
I think so. Honestly, I mean, hindsight's 2020, but yes, I think I do believe that.
Yeah. And that becomes a big turning point, from charging ahead to slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
Can we, so let's, I was thinking about this the other night. I have a friend off on the other coast, and I was just thinking about our different backgrounds. And nobody has a perfect childhood, nobody has a perfect background. But you innately had this mind of a scientist and this heart of a champion also, a competitor. And those things were able to be applied to this. And that's really important because here you are telling your story, and not everyone has those exact same qualities that you had that got you through it. I think your story is universal, the applications. But I'm going to have to thank you again for not just being on this show, but for telling your story, because it's so valuable.
Thank you.
Along that line, you're welcome. Along that line, let's go back to before the accident. And there are already things in you that are still there. And because you relate how, as you began to succeed as a runner, you were also encouraging others and encouraging young girls, mentoring maybe, and getting involved in programs there, and also involved in programs that would help the environment, clean air initiatives. But you also ran through Haiti to raise money for relief funds there. Can you just tell us what your experience was? How far did you run, and what was it like running through Haiti? And it was a terrible time for the people in Haiti after some of those storms. What was your experience like there doing that?
Yeah, so that was actually one of my first big run projects. And I've always loved, I mean, some of the things you've mentioned, I've always loved using running as a bigger story for something else. And I feel like it can be that way. It's this medium that we can, explore the human experience and relate to one another. And so in Haiti, this is the run across Haiti. And it was I forget which year it was, but it was early on in my ultra running career. And I was super excited about it because we partnered with this team TASI. And it was basically this organization on the ground in Haiti that would raise money for families, not just to give them something, but to educate them on, like a skill set and to teach them to, a new job. And we also partnered with this company. So North Face is partnered with Timberland, the shoe company. And at that point in time, we were raising money for these factories where they would hire Haitians to they have a big problem with clean water. And so a lot of the Haitians have to have bottled water, which is safe enough to drink, because if not, people are literally dying from dehydration due to cholera. I mean, that was like one of the biggest things after some of the storms, is that the water system, they were not drinking clean drinking water and dying from preventable, parasitic and infections or, just treatable diseases. And So there's a lot of problems with excess plastic in Haiti and the trash. And so basically this company was hiring Haitians to go and to collect bottles and then bring them to these factories, which would then make it into thread and use that to make shoes. And then with North Face, the clothing. And so then that was kind of the whole purpose of going down there. And all in all, I ran 200 miles across Haiti. And it was kind of there's another team that went down there, like North Face is sponsoring me like a certain amount of money per mile that I ran, but that was kind of the model. And then that would all go towards funding this organization on the ground that did things like exactly as I had just described. But yeah, I mean, I think in many ways it did feel selfish because running across Haiti, running is a very affluent sport. I mean, you can run if you have the, ability to do so from a recreational standpoint, from a time perspective, but also from a caloric, perspective. If I'm healthy enough that I want to like, quote unquote, stay in shape, this was not the case for the majority of Haitians. We didn't see people running because they're too busy working or trying to get enough food to feed their family. And so there was that, that I don't know, that kind of pull in me, that just kind of that fight in me that I was like, oh, this sometimes doesn't feel right. But at the end of the day, it was a really beautiful way to connect people because they were just so happy. And once they kind of learned what we were doing, it was beautiful because, I got to see the countryside and interact with, the villagers and, see how much of a difference that I could be making. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm understanding from what you said that probably North Face set this up.
Yeah, so actually North Face was a partner. They've been a partner for this organization. It was actually like the Run Across Haiti, like Team Tassie organization that's like on the ground in Haiti. So North Face was a collaboration. And then they also partnered, like I said, with like Timberland. They partnered with this company to kind of help create momentum.
Yeah. So there you are out being very healthy and helping other people. And there is a whole list of people who helped you when you needed it. Yeah. And by the way, when I fell off a roof and broke my ankle, my wife said I was a terrible patient.
I think I was a terrible patient too. Like that's one of the hardest things is to ask for help because I had previously associated it with weakness. But as I learned, and I wrote about this in the book, as I learned, it's not about me, and no one that helped me saw me as weak. They wanted to be there. It was an expression of love. And, it's just like this push-pull relationship. It's again, that kind of teeter-totter analogy, just like finding balance. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to ask for help and then to also be able to receive it.
Yeah. So for everyone who's listening, I think the rest of our conversation could almost come under the heading of how is strength perfected in weakness and vulnerability? What would you say about that?
Yeah, and I think I mean that's what I was trying to kind of bring across in the book as well is previously I defined strength as such a physical attribute. I think that, certainly today that strength is associated with how big of muscles you have, how much you can gut it out and be tough, like running through different conditions or snow or, no matter how you feel, you can just be tough and go out there. Like that strength, like physical strength. And I think I had mistakenly got into that as well. I had defined it that way. But the beautiful thing that I discovered is that there's incredible strength in vulnerability. Like one of the hardest things that I had to do, that I had to learn to do, was to let someone see me when I was so broken and I was so sad and I felt like I had nothing to offer the world or, them or even myself. And being able to show up and to be honest in that and to show that vulnerability to people that I care about and have them accept me and love me in the same way, that's so strong. And another version of, strength that I saw is I would I before the accident I would never describe myself as brave. I would describe myself as calculated. I'm a scientist, so I take,
Mhm.
I see A through Z and I'm like, okay, this, and I compare it to, my other cons list, and then I make a decision. I don't think I'm brave, but what I learned is that having courage and being brave is knowing that you're fearful and facing that fear, looking at it in the eyes, acknowledging it, and still choosing to walk towards it. And that's exactly what my recovery was, and being fearful and not knowing the answer, not knowing the outcome, and still taking that on and having the courage to do so. And that's another aspect of strength that I was able to discover through this whole process.
That really hits our culture right in the face because we are the culture of an obsession with strength and appearance, and we're John Wayne people.
Absolutely.
But John Wayne was just someone playing Superman in a cowboy hat. I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah, he was a great screen presence, but he didn't. I can think of so many examples where he did not define strength the way you just did.
Mm.
And so our culture is obsessed with strength, but there isn't a single thing that I can think of that is more brave than being authentic.
Mm.
And authentic with yourself. You talk about being honest with yourself.
Mhm.
You talk about giving 100% in everything you've done. And you talk about being honest with yourself. And of course, I remember falling off a roof and breaking my ankle. I went and had an ankle surgery. And I was kind of mad about it.
Mhm.
I didn't have any crutches yet, so I hopped up a flight of stairs and hopped all around my apartment. And then I was tired.
I've done that before.
Yeah. But so uh, you say in your book that you actually realized your responsibility to put positive energy into your rehab and into your working with people that were helping you to be a better patient, and
Mhm.
knowing that you would be able to help other people later. But so that's just part of showing up, isn't it? To
Mhm.
and you got to think about the other people too.
Right. And I think that's also what I learned is in being honest and showing up for myself, then I could actually show up for other people, whether that was, in my immediate recovery, or later.
Yeah. So let's go into a little kind of an aside, but everything is in a circle. And I know that you love both the sky running and science, neuroscience. And so during your rehab, you ran into someone who practiced rolfing.
Mhm.
And originally, that I've talked to someone recently who was both a rolfer and a Feldenkrais practitioner. I don't know if you're familiar with both of them, but Ida Rolf named her work at the same time that Moshe Feldenkrais named his. And
Mm.
she called her structural integration, and
Mm.
he called his functional integration. He was a pioneer in neuroscience, actually,
Yeah.
practical neuroscience. He was also a scientist and an engineer and a PhD and a uh, pretty well-read person.
Nice.
Uh,
Yeah.
he knew anyway. Enough of that. But so Ida Rolf originally had the reputation of her treatments being very painful, an attempt to restructure the fascia and change your function by changing your structure. But according to the person I've talked to who's done both, uh, the current version of Rolfing is a little bit more understanding that the real benefit is also changing the nervous system. So, can you comment on what you learned about that part of your therapy? How did it involve the nervous system?
Yeah. So, and this was actually interesting because again, I thought I had this conception of rolfing that it was very painful and like fascia manipulation. I've had that before, like kind of these dry massages. It feels like a rug burn. But I get it. Like, and for me, I was experiencing these changes to my body and the kind of this almost phantom pain and favoring one side, even though my foot was supposedly healed, right? But I was still experiencing this real problem. And so when I started working with Levi Younger, he was the rolfer that I was seeing here, he really just blew my mind. And so it was funny because I came with the neuroscience perspective and he came with this whole like structural integration perspective. And it was really interesting because how I learned from it and how I would tell it to other people is that Rolfing, I mean, your nervous system is applicable in your fingertips. It's the easiest place for you to access your nerves is at your skin. There's all of the sensory neurons for fine touch, for hard touch, for, pressure, for like temperature, for, anything. And so if you're going to manipulate the nervous system, you start there. You start by manipulating the skin and then manipulating the fascia that are underneath that. And so that's where we started. And I could actually see this real progression in, that manipulation in particular on my foot, where I was having a lot of this like phantom pain and these problems, even though supposedly I was, healed, on the inside, but, my nerves had to relearn and had to kind of regrow. And the easiest way for that to happen is at that skin level. And it's so cool that, when you think about that, your nervous system is like applicable, is reachable on your, in your fingertips.
Yeah, for sure. There's your fingertips have so many nerve endings, kind of like your feet.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So sky running requires extreme skill.
Mm-hmm.
Probably it's very helpful to have good eyesight. And
Yes.
but also feeling of what you're doing, where your body is, and feeling in your feet, very important.
Mm-hmm.
So a very famous saying, Moshe Feldenkrais said, we act according to our self-image. And he regarded our self-image as maintained very much in our movements. And so can you comment on how the entire process of going through this accident and getting back to being able to do sky running again, how did it change your self-image, and how did the change in your self-image, even mentally, affect your movement, and how did your movement affect your self-image, and so on?
Yeah. So the coolest thing about the whole injury recovery, and of course hindsight is 2020, but it allowed me the opportunity to not only slow down, but to really examine the reasons why I wanted to run again, to examine why it was so important for me for that self-expression, and why that was worthwhile for me to pursue it and to pursue this thing for no other reason than the fact that I loved it.
Mhm.
To let go of any expectation of returning to elite sport because I had to do so. And in doing so, I was able to discover the reasons why I love running so much. And it has nothing to do with competition, and it has nothing to do with needing it in order to define who I am, but it has everything to do with feeling alive and feeling connected to myself and to the world and to the community, and just this form of self-expression. And I think, I just think that for me was just incredibly important. And like I said, it was just this opportunity for me to fall in love with running again. And how often do you get to do that, twice?
Yeah, yeah.
And, it allowed me to discover that I'm, not defined so one dimensionally, that, that there's these other parts of me. And it's not linear. It's not even, straightforward. It's this huge, it's messy, but that's what makes it beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was just, one of the avenues that I was able to discover it. And it was just so worthwhile.
And you, along with other athletes, are probably a better athlete and will perform even better by going through this experience. But what you brought up is another right in the face to our culture here is that is that we don't have to always be process oriented or goal oriented. We can be process oriented, and we can be patient, and we can. At one point, I think running defined me in a bigger way than it does now. If I were to lose it now, I know there's other things about life that are important. But I'm so joyful in being able to do it at 70. I don't compete, but I can get out there for as many hours as I want. And so, I mean, I can't put it aside. I can still do it. Why should I? I find so much joy in it, but it's really just an opportunity, just an open door into life. And even the way I want to use it, in relating to other people is kind of that way. It's an open door into even more.
Right. And you described it so well. It's about the process, and it's not about, an individual performance or even an individual run. It's about the process and what we can learn, through recovering from something, or, even in the course of a single individual run. It's so beautiful. And to not be so goal oriented or, result oriented, that to me just like takes away the fun, and the process is like what I learned to fall in love with again.
Yeah. So the balance between those two things, I don't think we ever get it perfect.
No, but that's
But,
maybe the point.
well, it kind of is the point, because each day trying to find that place of being process oriented is almost like the joy of getting to a mountaintop that day.
Exactly.
Even being in the process, maybe it wasn't perfect, but
Yeah.
but that's what makes the next day interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's talk about patience, because there's a big difference between being patient till I get my strength back and just learning to approach life with more patience. So first we want to get our strength back, and then we realize maybe I have to be patient a lot longer than I thought. So can you talk about your experiences being patient with your pool running, because it's kind of a slower activity, and maybe even being patient with the process of getting back into the classroom and doing things like that, scary things.
Yeah, so patience, I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as a patient person, but running is kind of an active practice in patience. Like each step you can kind of see your progress. So it's like it encourages you to be patient if you can just focus on the here and now. But in my recovery, I had to kind of apply that theme and basically just take it as, again, a process, that it was imperfect and that it wasn't going to be straightforward. It wasn't going to be what I expected. I literally couldn't attach myself to a plan. And that's kind of what, that's what allowed me to keep going and to keep showing up for myself. I had to slow it down to even, 1 hour at a time or 1 day at a time, and focus on what I could do then, and even in the here and now, in order to kind of move forward. And that I did that as I was getting back into teaching, and just kind of focusing on a day at a time, and trying to focus on putting those together, and having faith that that would lead to some sort of progress in the long run.
Yeah. There's those transition points where you're using crutches, or you're wearing a boot, and everybody knows that you've been hurt, and then you get rid of those, and now nobody knows, but
Right.
so
And that's always super hard. And it's like the epiphany of realizing that, oh wow, like, okay, yes, I know that I'm hurt, but I appear normal. And then, that's basically how everyone else is experiencing the world. Like I have no idea what everyone else is experiencing. And it just encourages you to, like, at least me, to have more grace and empathy and patience with not only myself but everyone else.
yeah. All right, well, I don't want to wear you out too much here, but let's comment on Bushido. Can you tell us about Bushido?
Yeah, so this is something that I have. So that was my first running shoe that I really liked on the trail because it's like it hugged my foot very snugly and on technical terrain. It felt very comfortable. And I looked up what Bushido meant, and it's like the way of the warrior. It's some Japanese like kind of like proverb or just a kind of phrase or saying. And it was something that I had to take with me, like this way of the warrior. This is something that I learned that I had this skill to be a warrior, and that I had this armor that, that was maybe at the back of the closet and that I had forgotten that it was there, but it's part, I had it all along. And, when I had to, sometimes in life you're required to be a warrior again, and it just makes me, I have to go to the back of my closet and dust off my armor and, put it back on again and, go to the way of the warrior. And I talk about that in my book as the path to recovery isn't straightforward, and I had experienced an injury again, and I had to kind of go back and embrace that way of the warrior and find other ways to move forward.
Yeah. So the book is beautifully written, sometimes even kind of verging on poetic for a few sentences where you describe being out, in nature and doing the things you do. So I want to really urge everybody to pick up the book Out and Back. And Hilary, would you like to tell people how to get in touch with you and find out more about your work? And maybe, I don't know, maybe you'd even like to describe your coaching.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very happy to have the book out there for people to read and hopefully, relate to it in some way through their own experiences. But you can find me. So there's several ways. I have a website. It's hilaryallen.com. And, there's a contact form there for, if you want to be a part of my book club. So I've created a little PDF for, if you want to read my book and follow along on like a little run club. There's little challenges and kind of nuggets for food for thought. So you can do that. You can apply for, or not apply, but you can sign up for it there. And then on my website, there's pretty much everything, information for coaching, personalized coaching, or through CTS, Carmichael Training Systems. And then on Instagram, it's hillygoat_climbs. You can follow me there. And between those two things, you can keep in touch with all the podcasts and events that I have going on as far as with the book and and everything that I'm getting into.
All right. So Hilary, is there any final word that you would like to leave our listeners with? They've listened to all of this. Well, how would you sum it up? What do you really want them to take away today?
I would just say, first of all, thank you for having me on. And second of all, I would just say we're all struggling with something, no matter what it is. And I think even though it's difficult and we can't understand what we're each experiencing, we're brought together in, sympathy. And it's beautiful that we can all relate through struggle, and to not be afraid of the changes that and the learning that you can have through those struggles. So I just encourage everyone to lean into that.
All right. Lean into that for sure. For sure. Thank you so much, Hilary. I really appreciate your time. This has been a wonderful conversation here.
Thank you so much.